Johnny Depp, the fall, the fight, and why the narrative outlived the verdict. For years, a single word was enough to destroy one of the biggest actors on the planet. Not a rumor. Not a tweet. A headline backed by a court of law. Wife beater. A judge found it substantially true. Hollywood moved fast. Studios cut ties. The world considered the case closed. The story seemed simple enough, victim and abuser, until a second trial with public evidence, unedited audio recordings, and live cross-examinations, examined that version inch by inch and failed to find what everyone had assumed was proven. And yet, years later, millions still hold to the original story. Which means the real question is no longer what happened between two people. The real question is more uncomfortable than that. How does a narrative become official truth, and how does it survive even when the evidence stops supporting it the way everyone believed it did? April 2018. The British tabloid The Sun publishes a piece with a line that travels around the world. How can J.K. Rowling be happy about casting Johnny Depp in the new Fantastic Beasts film? Buried inside, one word, heavy as lead, wife beater. This was not someone's personal opinion. It was not a random internet post. It was a major British tabloid at a moment when the cultural temperature was at a boiling point. The hashtag #MeToo movement had rewritten the rules. Public accusations were no longer just media scandals. They were reputational earthquakes. Depp sued the newspaper for defamation in the United Kingdom. One thing to understand clearly, this was not a trial against Amber Heard. This was Depp against the tabloid. The newspaper had to prove the headline was substantially true, not that every detail was accurate, not that every episode was confirmed by irrefutable medical evidence, only that the accusation had sufficient basis under the British civil standard. In November 2020, the judge rules against Depp. The article is found to be substantially true. Legally, the headline holds, and that changes everything. Because when a devastating accusation stops being just one person's version and receives judicial confirmation, it stops being a matter of debate. It becomes institutional truth. And when something becomes institutional truth, studios do not wait. Warner Brothers removes Depp from Fantastic Beasts. Disney had already been pulling away from him on Pirates of the Caribbean. The industry needs nothing more. The narrative is no longer, she says. The narrative is a judge confirmed it. But behind that trial were things that received very little attention. The journalist who wrote the article, Dan Wooten, had been in contact with Amber Heard before publication. Information was exchanged before the headline went to print. The case was handled by a single judge, Andrew Niccol, with no jury. One person determined credibility. That same judge later rejected Depp's appeal, which referenced new evidence related to Heard's unfulfilled charity pledges. The appeal was rejected by Andrew Niccol himself. The network of connections around the trial runs further. The judge's wife is a barrister who specializes in human rights and domestic violence, the exact subject matter of the case Niccol was adjudicating. Niccol had previously had a professional relationship with attorney Jeffrey Robertson, with whom he co-authored academic work. Robertson was the mentor and employer of Jennifer Robinson, who was connected to Heard's legal team in the United Kingdom. During the trial, a private dinner took place which Heard attended. It was organized by Robertson's ex-wife, who is a close friend of Judge Niccol's wife. The judge's son worked at Talk Radio, a company belonging to the Wireless Group, which was acquired in 2016 by News Corp, the media conglomerate owned by Rupert Murdoch. Murdoch owns The Sun. None of this proves coordination. None of it establishes corruption. No formal accusation has been made, no document proves intent. But the network of connections exists, and it was through that network that a headline traveled from a piece of text to institutional truth. After which the world considered the matter settled. Until a second trial arrived. And crucially, this one was televised. Fairfax County Circuit Court, Virginia. Depp sues Amber Heard for defamation over an op-ed she published in the Washington Post in December 2018. She did not name him. She presented herself as a public figure representing survivors of domestic abuse. The world knew exactly who she was talking about. Everything was different now. No single judge evaluating evidence behind closed doors. A jury. A live broadcast. Millions watching every gesture in real time. Social media reacting as each moment unfolded. 6 weeks. Cross-examinations. Expert witnesses. Full, Unedited audio recordings. What in the United Kingdom had been a technical ruling on whether a headline could withstand a civil standard became here a full public dissection of every episode. And things began to surface that had not been presented this way before. Audio recordings in which Heard admits to physically hitting Depp. Recordings in which she mocks the idea that anyone would believe him if he reported the violence. Conversations in which the dynamic of the relationship stops looking like a clean story of victim and perpetrator. Nobody claimed the relationship was not toxic. What became clear was that the one-directional narrative had started to crack, and crack badly. Then came the donation. After the divorce, Heard received $7 million. She had stated publicly, in television interviews and under oath, that she had donated that money to the ACLU and to Children's Hospital Los Angeles. At trial, it emerged the money had not been fully transferred. She had pledged it. Under pressure, she clarified, she had made a commitment, not a direct donation. The difference between donating and promising to donate is not enormous on its own. But for years, that donation had been a central pillar of her public credibility. And once that pillar showed a crack, every crack that followed carried more weight. The jury listened, evaluated, deliberated. Their conclusion: defamation had occurred. The op-ed was published with actual malice toward Depp. This is not a full exoneration of every action taken in that relationship, but it is a direct blow to a narrative that had existed for years as uncontested truth. In the United Kingdom, a judge found the headline could stand. In Virginia, a jury found that the public accusation, as it had been presented, constituted defamation. Two legal systems. Two standards. Two outcomes. The world could no longer pretend the story was simple. After the Virginia verdict, Heard gave an interview. It was not a technical breakdown of the facts. It was an attempt to rebuild the narrative. And it produced lines that landed like detonations. "I still love Johnny," said after describing him as the most dangerous aggressor in her life, after accusing him of promising her global humiliation. That is not a legal statement. That is a psychological one. Asked about the $7 million, she said she had made a commitment. Though for years she had said publicly that the money had been donated. At trial, it had been established that the Washington Post op-ed was published at the absolute peak of the #MeToo movement, had been carefully reviewed by lawyers, described her experience as a public victim of domestic abuse, and that Depp's career collapsed directly after it ran. It was not about him. And yet in the British trial, the headline had been direct: "Wife Beater." Written by Dan Wooten, who had been in contact with her before publication. The interview did not change the verdict. But it made one thing clear: a trial can end. A narrative does not. Go online today, any forum, any comment section, any trending thread, and the story is still divided as though the Virginia trial never happened. Some hold to the original version untouched. Some say the whole thing was a media operation. Some reduce everything to a comfortable shorthand. Both were equally bad, turning a case packed with specific evidence, audio recordings, photographs, and sworn testimony into something deliberately blurred. The reasons are not mysterious. When someone has believed a narrative for years, changing position is not simply adjusting one fact. It means accepting that they may have been publicly wrong. That is painful. For many, this case stopped being about two people and became a symbolic battle between genders, movements, and power structures. When something becomes part of identity, a single verdict does not dislodge it. And if you defended a version with moral conviction, accepting that it was not proven the way you believed means more than correcting a factual error. It means publicly rebuilding your moral compass from the ground up. That is why the narrative does not disappear. Not because new evidence emerged. Not because the verdict was overturned. But because letting go of the story means letting go of part of yourself. A court can rule. Evidence can be on the record. Audio can be unambiguous. But if a narrative is already embedded in the culture, it does not vanish. It adapts. It rewrites itself. It finds new defenses. Heard had spent years as more than an actress accusing her ex-husband. She had become a public symbol of activism against domestic violence. She gave speeches. She appeared at events. She served as a human rights ambassador for the ACLU. Her public image was inseparable from the idea of a survivor who chose to speak. When someone occupies that symbolic position, their words stop being merely personal. They become a flag. And in Virginia, what went on trial was not just the credibility of a person, it was the credibility of the flag. When the jury found defamation, it was not just one version of a relationship that fell. A public construction began to fracture. That is what made this case so explosive. This was not a routine celebrity scandal. This was a cultural symbol at the height of #MeToo. A story that fit the spirit of the moment perfectly. Powerful man, female victim, complicit industry. When a story fits too well into the mood of an era, nobody wants to be the one who raises a doubt. And when that story starts to show cracks, the reaction is not gentle, because accepting that the symbol had flaws means doing something very difficult. It means separating the cause from the person. Separating the movement from the public figure. And that is not easy when millions have already emotionally identified with the narrative. What remains in the end is a feeling that is hard to describe. Not triumph. Not defeat. Something more uncomfortable than either. Because this story was never really about Johnny Depp or Amber Heard. It was about how the world works when a narrative sets the internet on fire. A story can destroy you. It can settle into headlines. It can be repeated millions of times until it stops feeling like someone's version and starts feeling like the truth. Media can amplify it. Social networks can harden it. It can become a moral position. And then the evidence arrives. Full audio recordings. Contradictions. Weeks of public testimony. A jury deliberating and reaching a conclusion. The narrative can be challenged. Taken apart piece by piece. It can fracture in front of millions watching live. But if the world has already decided who you are, it does not always listen to the verdict. Because changing your mind is hard. It is not just saying you were wrong. It is releasing a story you spent years defending as beyond question. That is why this story does not really end in a courtroom. It ends here, in the understanding that legal truth and social truth do not always move together. And it leaves one question hanging in the air, more uncomfortable than anything either trial produced. If tomorrow it is your name in thousands of headlines. If your life becomes a global trend. If millions of people have already decided who you are before they hear a single fact, how long will it take the world to change its mind? And how many people never will, simply because their pride will not let them?